Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome to today's Sioux Falls City Council meeting. Today is Monday, April 9th, and we're certainly pleased to have everybody here. We will start today's meeting by identifying the City Council members at tonight's meeting.
Councilors Aguilar? Here. Anderson?
Here.
Brown?
Here.
Entenmann?
Here.
Erpenbach?
Here.
Jameson?
Here.
Karski?
Here.
Rolfing?
Yeah, here.
Mayor Huther?
Thank you, City Councilors. All 8 are accounted for, which is great. As we do with every meeting of the City Council, we have an invocation, and we're very, very pleased to have Pastor Pat McClanahan of the Common Ground Worship Center. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Common Ground Worship Center, they hold their services at what's called the Gorley Building on 6th and Main in downtown Sioux Falls. So, Pastor Pat, we're certainly glad to have you here. And Pastor Pat will give us that invocation, and then if you would remain standing, we'll then have our Pledge of Allegiance. Pastor Pat.
Thank you for inviting me. If you'd bow your heads with me and come before the throne of our God. Father, we are thankful for living in a place where we can meet like this, where we can gather together to work through the process of governing, as people can come and share their opinions and share their thoughts. And we're thankful for you, Lord, because you are the source of all power and the source of all that is. We ask, Lord, that you would fill this place with your Spirit this evening, that you would give an extra measure of wisdom to all those who are present, that they would bring the business before the City Council, and that the City Council would humbly take on the duties that they have been elected to assume. Father, we thank you for this time, and we ask for your blessing on the proceedings this evening. In your name we pray. Amen.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Good evening, Mary. Welcome forward. Well, good evening, everybody, and welcome. We've got a special proclamation, and I'd like to introduce to the people of Sioux Falls, if they don't know, this is Mary Johns, and she's the director of Siouxland Libraries. We're certainly pleased to have you here, Mary. And I do have a proclamation that Mary has asked me to read to the folks of our town. Whereas libraries have historically served as our nation's great equalizers of knowledge by providing free access to all. Whereas libraries work to meet the changing needs of their users, including building collections in a variety of formats, expanding outreach services, and increasing programming. Whereas our nation's libraries provide a forum for diverse ideas and points of view that help us better understand each other and ourselves. Whereas librarians are trained professionals, helping people of all ages and backgrounds find and interpret the information they need to live, learn, and work in a challenging economy. Whereas librarians design and offer programs to meet their community's economic needs, providing residents with resume writing classes, interviewing workshops, and job-seeking resources. Whereas libraries and librarians encourage early and emerging literacy activities to help ensure reading, writing, and technology skills for the 21st century. Whereas libraries are part of the American dream, places for education, opportunity, and lifelong learning. Now, therefore, I, Mike Huther, Mayor of the City of Sioux Falls, do hereby proclaim April 8th through the 14th, 2012 as National Library Week in Sioux Falls, and I encourage all residents to visit a Siouxland Library branch this week to take advantage of the incredible library resources available at your library. You belong at Siouxland Libraries. Mary, thank you.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Well, Council will now move to tonight's consent agenda. Are there any changes or motions?
Mr. Mayor, I need to recluse myself.
Councilor Edelman, thank you. Councilor Edelman is going to recluse himself from the body. Council, any other comments or motions?
Move to approve, Anderson.
Second, Karski.
Councilor Anderson Jr. has made a motion to approve tonight's consent agenda, seconded by Councilor Dean Karski. If there are no further comments, a roll call vote, please.
Councilors Erpenbach?
Yes.
Jamison?
Yes.
Karski?
Yes.
Rolfing?
Yes.
Aguilar?
Yes.
Anderson?
Yes.
Brown?
Yes.
That has passed 7-0. Thank you, Council. Now moving on to tonight's regular agenda. Any motions or changes?
Move for approval, Anderson.
Second, Brown.
Councilor Anderson Jr. has made a motion to approve. It was seconded by Councilor Jamison. If there is no further discussion, a roll call vote, please.
Councilors Entenmann?
Yes.
Erpenbach?
Yes.
Jamison?
Yes.
Karski?
Yes.
Rolfing?
Yes.
Aguilar?
Yes.
Anderson?
Yes.
Brown?
Yes.
Thank you. That has passed 8-0. Again, folks, welcome to tonight's meeting. We're certainly happy to have all of you here. The council wants to provide you an opportunity to engage them. If you would like to come forward, speak to them about any topic that concerns you, please do so. All we'd ask is that you keep it to 5 minutes or less, as well as just introduce yourself to the people of Sioux Falls. If you want to talk about an agenda item later on, if you would just stay until that time, we'd appreciate it. But welcome, Ms. Staley.
Good evening. My name's Teresa Staley, and I have two citizen concerns I wanted to talk about tonight. First of all, wanted to remind people to vote tomorrow. It's an important city election. And I had a conversation this morning with Bob Blitz, our county auditor, about the concern I had on confusion on the voting centers. Dean Karski was quoted in the Argus on Sunday's paper, and I agreed with what he said about how people do have a tendency to get confused when we move these things around. And so the thing I wanted to have happen, I said it to Bob, I also talked to Bev Chase's office, and I wanted to say it to the city council office as well. I want to make sure that tomorrow every single precinct that is not being used has a big sign in the door that is commonly used as an entrance that tells people exactly where to go. Because I've had it happen to me personally. Apparently Karski heard people talk about it, and we don't want anyone to come to a place and have no information, no guide to where to go next. And then the next thing I wanted to point out for future elections, if we do this again, is that we are mentioning the community center, but I think, and I've got a little handout that I made up today, I think we should also have the elementary school listed next to that, because a lot of people don't know where these places are. Roosevelt High School, easy. Memorial Middle School. Mari Kars Community Center. It's by Hayward Elementary for people who don't know. Oyate Community Center, Garfield Elementary. Hawthorne's easily accessible. Edison Middle School, Whittier Middle School, Kenny Anderson Center by Annie Sullivan Elementary, also by Washington High in that area. Morningside Community Center by Harvey Dunn Elementary, Lincoln High School, Faith Baptist Fellowship Hall, and Primrose Retirement Community. I don't have the addresses up there. I think the citizens have gotten those. But just, I think a little more information would be helpful. Personally, I think it's worth it to spend more money and make sure we keep all, like we did for the event center, let's have all of the precincts open for the people. So that's the first concern. The second thing has to do with Neighborhood Watch. And as you may know, I've been a big advocate of that program for years, and I was delighted to see in the media recently that they were promoting that. And I've had conversations with Mark Cotter in the past and several council members about getting that information out in the water bills, as you just did for the voting centers, having a nice little insert and letting people know that this exists. So I have a challenge. I would like that information out in the May water bill. I think there's time to get that together, and then people could maybe formulate a group and have a picnic in August when we have our annual night out for the police department. So that's, I guess, what I have to say. And don't forget to vote tomorrow.
Teresa, great job. Normally we don't do this, but Denise, would you just mind telling the people of Sioux Falls what you told me?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. Bev Chase with IPC has a, it's a highlighter green kind of color vote center map with at all the locations that were formerly polling places. They will have those if they are not polling places to direct people to where they can go to vote. I believe those may already be up. Also, as a reminder, as Teresa said, the water bills were sent out with the polling places. They are available online at www.siouxfalls.org, and they were in the water bills, and they were in the newspaper, and I believe just about most TV stations also have them on there.
Thank you, Denise. And Teresa, thanks for motivating the people to vote. I'd encourage that same, and I know this council encourages that as well. Is there anybody else who wanted to speak to the council? Mr. Stenga, welcome. You look good. You look nice. Welcome.
Tim Stanga. I guess one issue that I want to address, and it's the first reading of it, so I guess I'm going to go ahead and read about it, say it anyway. The $4 million that's left over from projects that have been done at Sioux Falls. I guess what I look at, and a lot of people outside look at, is the citizens of Sioux Falls have said that the event center, we're going to get $115 million for the event center. And a lot of people look at the $4 million should be put towards roads, infrastructure, and maybe coming out with a tree trimming service that Sioux Falls can provide for the citizens of Sioux Falls for the trees they own in the off the boulevards. And then another issue I wanted to bring up was the railroad switchyard. Some people have addressed to me and remembering back that we were waiting for the environmental assessment study, and it was said that the environmental assessment study was going to be out within a month or 2 months. And a lot of people are trying to figure out, did we need to run up to Minneapolis like we did before the environmental study came out? And a lot of people wonder if it could have been done like video conference, or maybe renting a van to drive up, or did it take 10 people to go up to get this taken care of? Reading in the newspaper, and I know sometimes it isn't true, but if the southwest side of town doesn't want it and Brandon doesn't want it, does it have to be moved, or what are we going to do? We tell the government we want to get rid of pet projects. Well, this is one of them, and it's a pet project for not only from government issues, but it's pet project for Sioux Falls, because people are starting to realize that we're going to open up 13 acres downtown, and who's going to benefit? You know, it's going to be more TIF projects, and the TIF projects fall back on what you pay on your taxes for your property, for your house, and I'm hoping that we look at that wholeheartedly. Thank you.
Ms. Stinger, good job tonight. Appreciate it. Folks, anybody else want to speak to the council on anything? Well, very good. Teresa and Tim, thanks for your comments. Well received. We'll now move on to item number 6.
Second reading, an ordinance of the City of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, amending Chapter 10 of the revised ordinances of the city dealing with the licensing and registration of bicycles.
Thank you
Welcome.
for putting me in the front. What you have before you again is an ordinance amending Chapter 10.
Can I ask you a favor? Would you
I'm
mind
sorry,
just
Greg
introducing-
Vandekamp, Sioux Falls Police Department.
Thanks, Greg.
You betcha. This is an ordinance amending Chapter 10 of the revised ordinance City of Sioux Falls. Specifically, this amendment repeals all sections of Chapter 10 dealing with bicycle licensing and registration, which has been obsolete for many years. The Sioux Falls PD's intent with this is to remove that licensing fee and the program from the Finance Department to the Police Department. We will initiate a volunteer registration program with a lot more hope of getting some of the 375 bikes per year that we come into contact with back to their rightful owners.
Great, thank you. This is a second reading, folks, so you do have the opportunity to comment if you're interested. Is anybody interested? Very good. Council, questions or comments of, yes, Councilor Aguilar?
Move approval.
Thank you, Councilor.
Second, Entenmann.
Councilor Aguilar has made that motion to approve. It was seconded by Councilor Entenmann. Any discussion on this at all? Very good. A roll call vote, please.
Councilors Intiman,
Yes.
Erpenbach?
Yes.
Jamison?
Yes.
Karski?
Yes.
Rolfing?
Yes.
Aguilar?
Yes.
Anderson?
Yes.
Brown?
Yes.
That is passed 8-0. Item 7.
Second reading, an ordinance of the City of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, amending the revised ordinances of the city by revising Chapter 19, Article 8, Family Daycare Homes.
Jill?
Good evening. Jill Franken with the Sioux Falls Health Department Health Director. Item number 7 are revisions to Chapter 19 Family Daycare Registration Ordinances. Changes were made to the Family Daycare Ordinance last year to include inspections, and since that time, the Health Department has analyzed regulation in other communities, has received input on needed changes from the Health Department staff, sought feedback from the community, as well as responded to feedback from the City Council. Based on all of this input, the goals of these revisions include increased parental involvement as the first goal. In allowing parents to inspect family daycare is one of the items under that goal. Providers to notify parents of helpers employed, emergency helpers used, substantive changes to the family daycare or household composition, or any incidents or law enforcement actions would be included in this goal. The second one is to increase state registration, state-registered providers in Sioux Falls, which is currently around 50% of our family daycare providers are also registered with the state. The parts of this that are included in this goal is to recognize and encourage state registration. The tiered fee process is part of that, what we are aiming for when we include that tiered fee process, to encourage and recognize those who are state registered versus not. And then again, to overall increase the number of state-registered family daycares in Sioux Falls. We also aim to strengthen ordinance related to suspension and revocations of family daycare. Waiting 1 year to reapply after you've been revoked is one of the items in this change. And then also that a provider must submit an action plan to be reviewed and accepted before they are allowed to re-register after that year of lapse. We also ask that one of our goals would be to respond to the concerns of providers related to the definition of family daycare, the visitors that come to a family daycare home. That was another goal that we, after receiving feedback from providers, that we knew we needed to make that change. So in this change of ordinance is an added definition of visitor, and also added that visitors should be under the direct supervision of providers while they are at the family daycare while it's operating. Also included was to assure liability coverage is provided. Paul Bankford is going to speak to this item specifically in response to feedback since the first council reading, so he'll come up when I'm concluded with my comments. Should a change to that liability coverage be considered, certainly an amendment will. I leave that to you folks. The remaining proposed changes are either to better define the intent of existing ordinance or delete those no longer needed. There's a couple of items in here that are obsolete. One is to require TB testing is no longer necessary. We also then just put in some better definitions, one of those being to better define registered helpers, not necessarily to change the intent of the ordinance, but just to better define it. So prior to first reading, just to remind you all of what we went through within this last year, we vetted changes that we were regarding with the Department of Social Services at the state level. We also reviewed this with State Daycare Quality Initiative Committee, sought their input. Daycare providers, we had a meeting with them the end of January. We sent a letter to all of our family daycare registered providers in the city, and about 27 of those participated in that meeting, which was held in the evening at the library at the end of January. We also fielded phone calls from those that weren't able to attend the meeting or those that did and had continued questions. Fielded phone calls and emails, some positive and some that had concerns from those providers. We also mailed out a frequently asked questions to all of our family daycare providers, the same list that we invited to the meeting. And then we also held Public Services Committee. We presented to you all, those that were are involved in Public Services Committee. And then that was in February, and then Council Informational on April 2nd, as well as first reading that evening. So what's happened after first reading? Just to give you an update and a flavor for what we've received for input from providers, we've really had a handful of feedback from anyone in the community since that time. Most of those comments have been related to the section in the ordinance that relates to liability coverage, and Paul will be speaking more about that. There are also several folks in the audience here that will want to speak to this item, just to let you know that as well. And so I thank them for their opportunity to be here tonight. At this time, I'll have Paul Bangford come up and speak about the liability coverage.
Thank you, Mayor, City Council. Paul Bangford, Assistant City Attorney. Wanted to talk a little more about the liability insurance aspect of the daycare proposed changes. I think that there has been some concerns that the $1 million minimum that was initially proposed for Section 19-123 may be a bit ambitious, and that it might be appropriate to back off from the $1 million amount. In looking at what other states and municipalities have done, there's a wide array of differences in how they've approached it. Out of the 50 states, there's about 30 that require liability insurance for daycares and about 20 that don't. One of those that doesn't is South Dakota. And when you look at the varying amounts of minimum insurance required in many of those states, they range anywhere from $100,000 to $1 million. However, the vast majority of the states that have imposed minimum daycare liability insurance have been in the $100,000 to $300,000 range. When you're talking about the $1 million range, an example that I found is the state of Arkansas, where if you have 1 to 74 kids in your daycare, it's a $500,000 worth of coverage. That's the minimum. If you have over 75 children, then it's $1 million. There's also a difference in approach in states. Some require insurance in centers and not in family home daycares. And so there is a large difference in how that's handled. Councilor Jameson had asked me to talk a little bit about what a general liability insurance policy would cover. There are certain acts that it would not cover. It would not cover intentional abuse of a child. It would not cover molestation type of incidents that involve children. There are certain policies that can be added on and purchased that provide some coverage for that. That is not what is being proposed here. There may be daycares that on their own decide that they want to get those additional coverages. Generally, the types of injuries that I think are most common in daycares and what we would see covered under many of these general liability policies is, a child falling down the stairs, or a 3 or 4-year-old trying to play Superman and jumping off the back of the couch and maybe breaking an arm or breaking a leg. Maybe a hot pan on a stove that burns a child. When you look at the other states, there have been some serious injuries that have occurred on occasion in those states that have triggered some states' response for requiring some general liability insurance. One case was out of Georgia, known as DeMarion's Law, where a child was left in the back of a daycare vehicle and forgotten and became severely dehydrated. In that particular case, the child sustained $2.5 million worth of medical expenses over a couple of week period. Those are obviously more of the exception. The more common ones are the broken bones and the injuries that children get in their backyards and playing. There was another case out of the state of, I'm sorry, I don't remember if I said Georgia or Oklahoma, but that last DeMarion's case was Oklahoma. Georgia, there was a case where a 14-month-old was in a daycare. The daycare provider was doing some cleaning during that time, and the 14-month-old ended up headfirst in a a bucket of water and some bleach and some other chemicals and was in a semi-comatose state at that point and obviously incurred a lot of medical expenses. Again, those are the exceptions. Those are exceptions, though, that in some states have triggered the requirement for daycare liability insurance. The vast majority of the cases that are seen in daycares with injuries could be covered by a much less significant policy. Again, understand that we're talking about minimum liability requirements, and there are several daycare providers in this community that have chosen to have $1 million or more in coverage. But when we're talking about millions, there has certainly been some feedback, again, that may be a bit ambitious and that the minimum should be perhaps backed off on a little bit from that standpoint. Is there any other questions that any members of the council have for me in reference to that?
Mr. Bigford, before I go to the council, if
Yes.
I could just ask the public if they have so that they have an opportunity to speak first, and then we'll come back to you and to Jill if necessary.
Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Folks, this is a second reading, and we'd like to certainly invite you up. Please welcome. If you could just keep your comments to 5 minutes or less and just introduce yourself to the
Alan
council.
Olson from Sioux Falls. One of my friends was in daycare like that years ago, and she died. I would like to see a proposal, give them a warning of maybe 3 or 5, and then fine them so much after that, and then let them lose the license or lose it for the rest of their life. Okay? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Olson. Thank you. Folks, is there anybody else who please come forward? Folks, if there's anybody else who wanted to speak too, if you could just come, we'd appreciate that. Thank you. Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Erin Bovenkamp, Sioux Falls. I'm the mother of a 6-month-old and recently went through the process of finding daycare. And so I fully support these ordinances because I feel it supports parents' decision. If background checks aren't required for helpers, providers aren't required to notify of changes going on in the home, and parents aren't allowed to drop in, how can they ensure their child's receiving safe care on an ongoing basis? Choosing a daycare not only involves that initial decision, but also an ongoing monitoring of the safety and quality of the care that your children are receiving. So the screening of helpers, the encouragement of state registration, parent notification of changes in the home, and open inspection during normal business hours just helps parents' job making that decision on a day-to-day basis. So I urge you to put the safety of the children of Sioux Falls first and support this ordinance.
Erin, thank you.
Thank you.
Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Megan Ulmer, and I come to you tonight not only as a parent who works in Sioux Falls and has utilized a city-registered daycare, but also as a parent who has experienced the worst possible outcome in a daycare arrangement. When my daughter Meredith died this past June, and in light of what happened to my family, I feel compelled to be here in person to express my full support of these changes, especially those that strengthen a parent's ability to be informed of what's happening in a daycare and everything that occurs in the daycare home. Erin addressed some of the areas that I also support, such as the stronger notification requirements, which I obviously feel are important so you know who's interacting with your children and what other things are happening at the house. I'd also like to touch a little bit on the open door policy, just establishing a written policy so that parents could come and go as they please, whenever they please, without scheduling. I think it's a great tool for parents to be able to use so that you can see what happens at the times other than when you might be picking up or dropping off your kids. Finally, creating a time frame and conditions by which a provider would be able to reinstate their registration is necessary, and I think the procedure outlined is very fair to everyone involved. I think mostly requiring a provider to be held accountable or to be accountable to why their registration was revoked in the first place is especially meaningful. So I would like to thank the Health Department for their time and their care and consideration for developing these changes in the ordinance. And I would close by asking each and every one of you to support the changes as presented, and doing so will ensure that in-home daycares provide a safe and quality environment for children of Sioux Falls and the surrounding area. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Welcome.
Good evening. My name is Greg Porras, and I work with South Dakota Voices for Children. I come to speak to you tonight in support of the home-based child care ordinance, awaiting your action. As you've heard, families need access to safe child care in Sioux Falls. Sioux Falls has come a long way in recent years with ordinances that are among the strongest in the state. Making a selection on who to entrust and also continue to entrust your children to requires information, and the changes before you do that. Parents desire information which can be provided directly or indirectly. The direct modifications in the ordinance gives parents notice when there are changes in circumstance in the daycare home. The indirect modification gives assurances to parents on items that many parents already expect take place, like that helpers are registered, that they have been vetted, that homes are available to be inspected by parents during normal working hours. It's good to see the city continuing to work with the state to coordinate the registration process of home-based child care providers. The HERE system is a good step in that direction. Again, I ask you to support this ordinance in front of you this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Kadir, welcome.
Mr. Mayor, City Council, thank you. Kadir Ware. I strongly believe every child in this community should be kept in a safe place in a daycare. One thing I want to talk about it tonight, my wife have a daycare, home daycare for about close to 30 years. God bless her, I don't know how she's doing it. But one thing is bothering me, so if I am misleaded, please let me know. What I hear, I support every ordinance been talked about it today, but what I hear today, the parents have every right to go check even the bedroom of the daycare, if that's part of the ordinance or not. Because to me, the child should be in a safe place. The parent have right to have every information about the daycare they take their kids in there. It's a home care or daycare center. But I don't think it's right the parents walk in the daycare's house and check the bedroom or any other part of the house which not part where the daycare is. So if that's the truth, I am totally against that part because everybody have a right and privacy in their own home. My wife have a daycare for 30 years, have a kids for 15 years, family after kids coming in. Just because of one bad apple, we not should be punished everybody else. Again, I want to make sure I am supporting the ordinance. But the parents, I don't think right to go to check the bedroom of the daycare. So I don't know if that's the part of the ordinance or not. Facility the kids is grow on and kids is watch in, absolutely they have every right to see everything clean, the kids is safe, no kids should be abused by daycare. But at the same time, those who providing service for years and years to the children in this community, not should be any parents want to walk in here, check their bedroom or places don't have anything the daycare. So again, if that's part of it, I'm really against it, that part only. But if it's not, then I apologize, I've been misled or misinformed.
Kadir, thank you. After the public comment, I'll have Jill come up and answer that question. Thank you. Thank you, Kadir. Appreciate it. Welcome.
Hi, good evening. My name is Pam Stefanich, and I have been a family daycare provider for 17 years here in Sioux Falls. My background is actually in medical technology and microbiology, and when my son was born, I missed him too much to be at work. I wanted to come home and I wanted to spend more time with him, and I've started family child care at that time. And I wanted to kind of give you, if I could this evening, an insight from a daycare provider's perspective. And, you know, I think what I'll probably begin with is the fees that we're looking at. This was kind of a surprise to us providers who had attended the daycare provider meeting in January. At that time, we were presented a presentation by Luann, and Alicia. And they were indicating that, for the most part, if a provider was registered with the state, that fee would probably stay around $15. And that if they were not registered with the state, then there would maybe be an increase. So when the PowerPoint came out to actually list the fees, that was a surprise to us. It wasn't $15 for someone that's state licensed. It went up to $25. That's a 60% increase. And for those providers that are not state registered, they are going to be required to pay $125 a year. And that's a 833% increase. So that was kind of a surprise, and I'd like for that maybe to be looked at, because that is an expense for daycare providers, especially that daycare provider that is first getting into the business. They might be coming out of the business field. They might be coming out of a center. They might have been a center individual working in a center. And there's a lot of expenses in that are involved in starting a daycare. I have a question concerning the fees. If there was a brand new caregiver who started the process of becoming registered with the City of Sioux Falls in October, and that registration was completed, I have a question here that I'd like to direct to Luann, Jill, or Alicia. So that process was completed in October, and that provider, because she's not going to be state licensed, she hasn't been educated about that opportunity, she would have just paid the fee of $125. So now we move up ahead by 3 months, and it's December 23rd. Would they, again, have to pay the $125 at that time? Because each of our registrations are those fee amounts are required in December.
Ma'am, if you could just continue on,
Okay,
and then what
I
we'll do
will.
is when you're finished, then we'll go to the answers. Thank you.
Okay. I wanted to also impart with you that there was a statement made that the inspections by parents would increase the quality of care, of family child care. And I have to say that that very brief period in time when that parent is walking through the home of caregivers, that's just a window, a very short period of time. What would that be, a half hour to an hour? So that's just a window of time that they are going to be able to observe the atmosphere that's in that daycare, maybe the cleanliness and that type of thing. So I want to impart on you that we really don't want to mislead parents in that very short inspection is really not going to have an impact like you might think on the quality of care. The things that impact the quality of care of family child care is the integrity of that daycare provider, her experience. Does she network with other daycare providers? And is she actively seeking education? Is she maybe even seeking more than those 6 hours of required education time per year? That's going to have the impact, not so much that very short inspection. And because I am a family daycare provider, and I want to impart on you that there are times that I have families that are with me for an 8-year period. They maybe have those children, and those children are spaced out. But other times, this is a first introduction to that family. And I just want to let you know that it would be very uncomfortable, especially as a female in the home with other children, to allow someone I'm not familiar with to come into my home and inspect my home. I think I'd probably want if it was a male, I'd want my husband present. I think that would make me feel very uncomfortable. When we take on new families, it's kind of scary to be honest with you. We don't know anything about the integrity of those individuals. We may have had an initial phone call and that type of situation. I would like to see if, I believe in open door policy. I don't have any problem with that, but we are, under this ordinance, we're to show them our whole home. And at that same time, those 7, 8, or 9 children that we're caring for are coming with. You can imagine they're going to be coming with on that tour. And so those caregivers that have those infants, if they have 2 infants under 1 and maybe 2 more infants between 1 and 2, that whole group is going with. And they're all going to go on that tour. So I'd like to see some guidelines. I'd like to be, have those parents that are inspecting have some guidelines about where they're going to look and what they're looking for. And I think that would be helpful to that parent, and I think it would be helpful to that caregiver to relieve some of that unknown and make that more comfortable. The insurance coverage, I'm glad that level has been dropped because to require someone first getting into the business of daycare to pay the premium for liability insurance for a $1 million coverage, that's a lot to ask. There's a lot of expenses. It can take from 6 to 8 months for these caregivers to get that business going, to actually find families, and to initially pay for that expense, and then to realize, I haven't found families. I may have to go back into the business field and not do this. So that would be very unfortunate in that case. I guess that I think I've looked through my list, and that's all I wanted to share with you tonight. And I thank you for your time.
Pam, thank you very much. Is there anybody else who wanted to speak to this item before I go to the council? Very good. Jill, would you mind just coming forward, please? And there were a couple of questions, one by Kadir and one by Pam. Would you be able to address those quickly for the council?
Absolutely.
Thank you.
The first question was regarding inspection by parents and whether or not the entire house would be up for inspection. First off, I would just like to read the definition of a family daycare home. It means a dwelling occupied as a residence by the care provider in which family-like care is given. One of the changes includes, for the purposes of this chapter, it shall include all land, buildings, and structures located on the property where the family daycare home is situated. Then the next section of the ordinance that speaks to that simply says that it's under section 19-132 inspections. All family daycare homes shall be open to announced or unannounced inspections by the health department employees, law enforcement, code enforcement officers, that's all current, and daycare parents. That's the addition to the ordinance. At any time during normal business hours. I feel very strongly about this section of the ordinance. We have had numerous instances where it has been critical for our inspectors to have access to virtually all parts of the home because daycare has been provided in all parts of the home. We have found at times where children are napping in rooms that we weren't aware that was part of the daycare home, perhaps on a prior inspection, and found that indeed is part of the area that is being used. So we do know that in a family home that it's their option where they choose to provide that daycare, and therefore it should be open to inspection. We have not had, to my knowledge, complaints of our officers being disrespectful to where the inspections are occurring, nor do I feel in this case would we see that occurring by parents. I would suggest that it would be a really great idea for us to perhaps seek out the daycare providers after this ordinance is approved and do a review of how well that's going and if they're having any problems with parents inspecting. But it is just too critical of an item. If parents are paying for their child's care in this home, that they have access. Paul shared with you some of the very simple things that are very accidental that can occur, that if somebody was able to be allowed better access into that home to see for themselves where things are safely stored, where their children are being cared for, some of these things could possibly be averted. The second question then was what was shared at the meeting with the providers, and I'm really going to quickly, since I didn't go to that meeting, I would like Alicia to speak to that item. She and Luann were the ones who conducted that meeting with the providers, so I'm going to let her just answer that question.
Thanks, Alicia.
Good evening, Alicia Kalura, Assistant Public Health Director. I was at the meeting with the providers, and we were very careful not to give any fees out at that time. I think you'll remember back to Public Services Committee, we did not that evening either. We really wrestled with those fees for many months, and we didn't want to have that come out in any venue prematurely, not knowing what our final recommendation was going to be. So the final recommendation, we have to remember that that is to really recognize state registration, encourage state registration, use the tools that we have available in ordinance to promote state registration. It's not a tool to cover costs. And so, you know, from my recollection that evening, I was asked whether we're state registered or not, will we expect a fee increase? And I did say yes.
Thank you, Alicia.
Sure.
Council, we're now ready for your part of the work. Would anybody like to make a motion or some discussion? Councilor Dean Karski.
I guess I have a few questions. Talk about the liability insurance last, if that's okay. But before I get to that part, I'd like a couple more questions that I've received numerous emails on this proposed ordinance, and one of them is the inspection side. I understand, I get the part where health department employees, law enforcement, code enforcement officers, but when does an inspection of your home invade your privacy? A daycare provider is there with 6, 8, 10 kids. They're feeding lunch. A parent wants to inspect their house, and they say, "Really now? It just can't happen." Then what?
I would say that parents and daycare providers hold a contract with each other, and that contract is I entrust to you to provide safe and quality family daycare that you're telling me you're going to provide, and then I pay you for those services. And in return for that, I have the opportunity to be able to assure myself as a parent that you are providing that in a safe environment, and that I have access to that environment if I feel it's necessary to be able to assure myself as a parent that this is indeed the kind of home where I want care provided to my child. If that's not a reasonable request of that daycare provider, they certainly are under a contractual of some sort agreement with each other, and certainly that would have to be the provider's decision whether or not that was acceptable to her, because parents make all kinds of requests upon daycare providers. This would, they ask for certain things to be done for their children at certain times a day. They ask them to be helping them with training activities and things of that nature. Certainly, it's up to the daycare provider truly to say yes or no to that, and then they make a decision whether or not this is still an arrangement they want. That to me, this would just fall in line with that this would be just something they would have to contract with each other, but this at least provides that in ordinance that parents are given that opportunity.
And I understand that part, but by putting it in ordinance, are we subjecting that daycare provider to potential loss of their license because they didn't comply with the ordinance?
I would say that if a parent is finding something that goes against the ordinance, that just like any other parent right now that sees something when they're picking their child up or dropping their children off in the morning and they find something that is against our ordinance, that they certainly should, and we encourage them to call us, and then we will follow up on that with an inspection ourselves.
So then is it necessary that daycare parents have unlimited access to the entire daycare, to the entire home of the daycare provider? Like I said, I understand all the code enforcement, and when we had children in daycare, we asked to see the entire home, and Ms. Stefanich just happened to be one of our daycare providers back then, and she runs an excellent daycare. But we did ask to tour the entire daycare and the house, and everybody was always compliant, but like I said, there are times when it is unreasonable, and I just, putting it in the ordinance, I don't see where that makes it a better daycare, I guess, is the one thing I'm looking at. And I'm looking at taking that part. I guess I'd like to maybe ask the Pam Stefanich as, what are you, Pam, the president of the daycare providers local group? Can you speak to that part of that ordinance a little bit more, or what feedback you're getting? Yes.
Okay. It's now your opportunity to engage each other in this dialogue. I don't know if you want to.
I guess what I'm looking for is what does the public think? What do the daycare providers think? And I'd like to hear a little bit more about that. And if I thought it was within my means to call up a person to ask them that question.
Okay. Pam, would you mind coming forward and again reiterating what you've already reiterated?
It is uncomfortable. I think it would be very uncomfortable at times. It would be inconvenient at times. You know, again, I want to reiterate that that's just one, 15-minute, half-hour time frame in the day. And it's not impacting on, it's not educating that daycare provider. It's not impacting, and I don't want I don't want parents to come away with the feeling like that is really going to give them a true understanding of what goes on in that daycare. It won't. So, Dean, if you have a specific question, maybe that would be.
Councilor Karski, did Pam do?
Well, as a representative or president of that group, did you get a lot of pushback on that from your members?
I got there was a lot of discussion on how uncomfortable it would be to show them that whole house, how that would really disrupt that particular day, how those new parents that are coming on, you haven't even formed a relationship with them, you don't even know them very well, and here now you're taking them throughout your home. Yeah. You know, basically, you're asking the parents to play the role of the city of Sioux Falls, the health department. You're asking them to play that role. Are they able to? Will parents even actively do it? There's always been an open door policy. We've always had that. You know, that's just a normal practice of daycare providers. So let's not mislead parents. You know, for number one, they're going to have to actively know that they have that opportunity to do that, and then they're going to have to consistently do that. But is it fair for them to play the role of the health department?
Pam, thank you. Councilor Karski, any other?
I guess the last thing I would like to talk
Pam,
about.
Councilor, if you wouldn't mind, does anybody else have any questions of Pam before she leaves? And then, Councilor Karski, then I promise I'll come back to you, sir. Thank you. Any questions of Pam? Yes, Councilor Rolfing.
I'm having a little hard time with this because when somebody opens up their home for a business, they're opening up their home for a business. They're not just opening up a portion of it, especially when they can use just about all of it for that business. And it would seem to me that, and it's been a while since I've had kids in daycare, and we really didn't that much at all, but if I wanted, you could keep part of it very nice and very well done, or whatever you want to say, very, very pleasant and very cleanly, but the rest of it could be not quite that nice. And that would reflect on whether or not I wanted to have my child in that daycare. And I would know that very quickly when I walked into the rest of the house, and that daycare, as Jill had pointed out, could be using other parts of the house to take care, put their kids down for naps, different things like that. And if I just said, hey, I'm using my basement, for instance, and these 2 rooms in my basement for the daycare, and that's what I showed them, without showing them the rest of the house, if they want it, just seems to me to be a little not right. Also, when I choose to have a business in my house, that house is free reign.
Yep. I have to tell
Councilor
you.
Rolfing, did you want Pam to respond?
Yeah, respond to me on
Pam,
that.
would you mind responding to Councilor
Sure.
Rolfing, please?
I want to let you know that there are instances when caregivers are at risk. There was an occurrence where a gentleman had lost his job and had started to drink, had started to carry a knife. And he actually came to the home of the caregiver at the end of the day, and he wanted to take his 2 children home. And when she indicated to him that she would like him to go home, can I call you a cab? I would prefer that your wife or another family member come and get your children. He pulled a knife on her. Okay? You never know who you're dealing with.
Yeah.
This is a client she's had for some time. It was very uncharacteristic of him. There are parents that come and have been to the bar and are drinking, and now they want to go home with their caregiver. And I think it's even a federal law that you are not, by any means, as a caregiver, should you allow that person to drive home with that child.
With that child.
So, yes, it's a business, but it's a business unlike any other business. It is most cases, a woman with children. Just this morning, a caregiver in Minneapolis, she opened her home at 6:30 in the morning, the same time I opened my daycare this morning. She took in the first child, and within a half hour, as the parent was leaving, she felt the situation was wrong. There was a gentleman, an unidentified gentleman outside the door, and she left for work, but then made a call because she kind of felt uncomfortable about this situation. And during that phone call, she was talking to the providers to say, to this provider, to this woman, I don't feel comfortable about this situation. And the line went dead. And she went back immediately to find all 3 members of that home killed. The caregiver and her elderly parents that she had just taken into her home were found dead. And they was killed in the presence of that child. It is a business unlike any other business. We're out there alone. We're susceptible to danger.
Pam, thank you.
Thank
Yes.
you.
Council, any other questions of Pam? Very good. Councilor Karski, and then Councilor Edmond, I promise I'll go to you. Councilor Karski, you had some additional comments or questions?
We've had a lot of conversations regarding the liability insurance requirement, and especially for the smaller home-based daycares that might have 4, 5, 6 kids. And the need to have liability insurance to me is apparent, but I guess when we looked at the amount of requirement, most people can obtain home-based daycare liability insurance off their homeowner's policy for up to 6 kids and have a $300,000 policy and do it for about $150 a year. So after a lot of conversations, we agreed to consider the $300,000 limit, and at that time of motion, I will be making a motion to amend that section to a $300,000 limit instead of $1 million limit.
Councilor Karski, would you consider making a motion to adopt that process started?
So moved.
Second, Rolfing.
Councilor Karski's made a motion to adopt the ordinance. It was seconded by Councilor Rolfing. So now you have a motion that's on the floor. Councilor Karski, without directing you.
Yep, I'd like to make a motion to amend section 19-123.1, insurance, by changing the minimum amount of $1 million to $300,000.
Second, Rolfing.
Karski has made a motion to amend the main motion, and it was seconded by Councilor Rolfing. Is there any discussion on the amendment to the main motion? Hearing none, a roll call vote, please.
Councilors Intamin?
Yes.
Erpenbach?
Yes.
Jamison?
Yes.
Karski?
Yes.
Rolfing?
Yes.
Aguilar?
Yes.
Anderson?
Yes.
Brown?
Yes.
Thank you. That has passed 8-0. Is there any discussion on the amended main motion? Yes, Councilor Intamin.
I have a question for Paul, if you might, please.
Ms. Springford?
I'm going to step back to this allowing daycare parents to inspect a house and a home. And it's my understanding the ordinance reads, all family daycare homes shall be open to announced or unannounced inspections by health department employees, law enforcement, code enforcement officers, and the new addition would be, and daycare parents at any time during normal business hours. The most recent family daycare home inspection by the health department shall be displayed in plain view within family daycare. So what we've done here is just added, and daycare parents. They still have, or daycare provider in this case, could, because of what situation might be there, might say, you'll have to give me 10 minutes before we can do this. I need to take care of this situation. That person still has the right to refuse if they want to, but they will then have to suffer whatever phone call might be made to the department or those kinds of things.
Correct. There are also provisions in Section 19-133, Counselor Enneman, that talk about possibilities of suspension or revocation. And one of those that is listed there, I'm just looking for the particular subsection. Under subsection 7 of 19-133, any failure to comply with the requirements of this Article 8 could subject somebody to potential suspension or revocation. So I wanted to make you aware of that as well.
Okay. Okay. And thank you. This is one of those things, as a grandparent, really concerns me. And I do agree with Councilor Rolfing that we're walking a really fine line here. And I think that it's the responsibility of any business person, whether it's a home daycare person or anybody conducting business in a house, that they have an understanding, or they understand the people that they are accepting their child for too. So in some respects, it's also their responsibility to feel comfortable taking care of that child, and the parents during their initial interview, I would assume. So I'm going to have to vote in favor of this, because I do believe that this is very important for our children.
You know, one of the things I would say that definitely happened in the conversation, and it's Councilor Karski and Councilor Rolfing brought up the two ends of the spectrum. I mean, you're concerned about people's privacy interests. You're also concerned about whether parents have access to a daycare. One of the things that was looked at is up until last year, the only inspections that were done by the health department were at the opening of a daycare or if there was a complaint. There were no general inspections that were done until that was modified last year. So what we found out from an enforcement perspective is you'd go into people's houses and they'd say, this is the portion of the house where I run my daycare. Don't go anywhere else because there's no kids anywhere else in the house. And then you get continued complaints that this daycare has 18 kids in it, this daycare has 16 kids in it. Nick and Todd would go out to the residents and again be assured that no, this is the only place that we are operating a daycare. And there have been times when it has been determined that, well, the upstairs bedroom that they said no kids were in, you found 12 kids in the house because there were 3 or 4 kids that were upstairs. The reason for adding that to the parents is also just a practicality reason, you know, and I think Pam brought up a great job of, you know what, a parent is only getting an idea of being in that house for maybe a half hour, 45 minutes. The problem that the city has is these are minimum registration requirements. We are in people's houses far less often than parents. You know, if we make it a year, once or twice a year to a residence for an inspection, parents, if you consider that they're dropping off their kids, you know, every 5 days a week for 50 weeks a year, and then picking them up again. They're there 500 times a year. The city's maybe there once or twice. The primary gut check that a parent needs to take when they're taking a kid to a daycare is, does something not seem right here? You know, is everything seem up front? Does everything not seem right? And you know what, if this is put into ordinance, as Jill said, you know what, the general thought is that yes, parents will occasionally ask to go through the house, and maybe initially when this is passed or when you're taking your kids there, you know, you might have you're dropping your 3-month-old off at the daycare for the first time, heading back to work. You know what, those first couple of weeks, mom or dad may be very nervous about it and may be making lots of inspections. But over time, you gain a level of trust with your daycare provider. If you don't, on either end, if the daycare provider doesn't have that level of trust or the parent doesn't, that contract is terminated and people move on. But one of the things that was repeatedly worked on by the health department, and Jill and Alicia and Luann and the entire team, is to try to figure out ways to make parents more involved in the enforcement aspect and making sure what's going on. Because the reality of the situation is the city of Sioux Falls isn't in your home every day checking on your kids. We may be there once or twice a year. Parents are there 500 times a year. And so a lot of this is to give parents the ability to check on their gut and to make things are going to work out. And thank you.
Councilor Jamieson.
Thank you. Jill, if I could, or Alicia, I'm not sure where this question will go, but when somebody signs up to get a license or to get registered with the city, what other information do you give them to become a better child care provider? What do you do?
Sure. One of the things that we offer is they're required to take a certain number of classes, and the City of Sioux Falls covers the cost of those classes. That's in ordinance currently, and so that costs the city, it's over $40,000 a year to take basic child care classes, CPR, first aid, the things that, yes, they're required, but they're also covered as a cost. So those are things that we do. We also have information and that's on our website, and then also access to the 211 helpline that has information as well in there. But I'd say those education classes are really, some of the most important things that we do for providers. We also, what we've started doing just in the last year as well is making sure that they're aware of those ordinances and sign off that they've read within the application and renewal process what those requirements are for family daycare. I hope that answers your question.
It does, and I think that's great. I really liked what Pam was saying earlier, some of the education and the networking, continued education, those kinds of things. I like that. So after this is done, and I know you're going to meet with those providers again, I really like where she's coming from. A lot of her comments were really good. And then if I could, I'd make a comment as well on the inspection process. Having somebody watch your kids is about as important as it gets, I think. It's not like dropping your car off for an oil change. I mean, this is as big as it gets. And I remember it, and I took that pretty serious. We made those surprise inspections, and it wasn't an ordinance, but we did it just because it was the right thing to do. And I think these ordinances are creating a minimum standard, as Paul kind of alluded to, that anybody in the public should expect to live by or expect those providers to have. So they are minimum standards, but the responsibility at the end of the day lies with the parent. And I hope our goal is always to try to eliminate the possibility of those abusive, neglectful child care providers. And I think the city's making the right steps in that way. And thank you for your work.
Thank you.
Councilor Jameson, thank you. Councilor Urbanbach.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. My comment really kind of reiterates what Councilor Jameson and what Paul said. Just very briefly, those inspections are not half hour long. They're 5 minutes. I know when my kid is taking a nap, and I'm going to walk in there and see where my kid is taking a nap. And if he's in the middle of a duvet on a master bedroom and he's got pillows around him and he's sleeping on his stomach, I've got issues. And that is the role of the parent. And it is a matter of just walking in unannounced. It's lunchtime and there's 7 kids in the kitchen and they're all eating whatever they're eating. Is that the diet that you had promised as a daycare provider that my child was going to be receiving? And that really is what this is about. It's about putting that responsibility on the parents and allowing that, empowering them to be those advocates for their children. And I commend staff for this ordinance. It's good stuff. Thank you very much.
Councilor Anderson Jr.
Jill, I'll throw one at you, and this is back to the inspections. How do you interpret an inspection? I mean, as far as whether it's law enforcement, they have legal, for private property, of course, they have legal restrictions on what they can inspect unless they have some type of complaint, correct? So if your daycare people come in and inspect a daycare residence, what type of inspection do they do? Is it a visual inspection and physical inspection? And what do you expect parents to do as far as inspection-wise, too?
The inspections that we conduct are based solely on the ordinance, and so they have an actual checklist the officers do, and that's what they use when they go in to do an inspection. So they're actually looking at each of the elements of the ordinance that relate to an inspection and conducting it in that manner, and then they're writing comments and notes and providing that feedback to the family daycare provider, and then that's posted on our website. So that's the inspection that our inspectors do. Now, there are times when they may see things that are outside of our ordinance that are concerning to them, And while that isn't inclusive necessarily of the inspection process, it will yield either a call to law enforcement or to child protection services or the state child care services if it's something that they regulate and they're state regulated. So there's multiple levels in which they may then take and make a call and report items that they see that are outside of our ordinance but are certainly either a neglect, harm, or some other type of circumstance for the children in the care of that daycare. Parents, on the other hand, certainly this would be a guide for them as well, the ordinance, but parents are at the liberty to have really all kinds of requirements of things that they think are important to them in how their children are cared for. That's one of the things that they do when they're interviewing is ask those questions, or we encourage them to find out, are your means of caring for children matching what my expectations are, and if not, I'm not taking my child to you. And so that's, I would certainly say that parents have much more authority to ask lots of questions, but this would at least allow them this, to be able to look at these minimum items for themselves.
Thank you.
Council, you've had great dialogue, and I know the community appreciates it. We do have an amended main motion on the table for your consideration. If there is no further discussion or amendments.
I have one comment.
Okay, Councilor Anderson Jr.
I feel that this is extremely important to our community. Our children are our most valuable commodity that we have in our city, and we need to make sure that they're protected. This is a work between the city, the providers, and the parents. And I think that the changes that have been stated here tonight are worthy changes and will move forward in protecting children. One other thing I'd like to say is to Megan Ulmer, thank you for having the courage to come here tonight and speak to us. We really appreciate it. Thank you.
Move to approve, Entenmann.
It's already on the table.
There is already a motion. There's an amendment. Very good. Council, let's vote on this, please. If we could have a roll call vote, please, I'd appreciate it.
Councilors Intamin?
Yes.
Erpenbach?
Yes.
Jamison?
Yes.
Karski?
Yes.
Rolfing?
Yes.
Aguilar?
Yes.
Anderson?
Yes.
Brown?
Yes.
Thank you. That is passed 8-0. Item number 9.
Item 8, first reading an ordinance of the City of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, amending the revised ordinances of the city by implementing a lodging establishment tax within the Main Street Business Improvement District.
Good evening.
Welcome.
Thank you. Brent O'Neill with the Community Development Department here on this item. The council did hear this item back in March. It's regarding a lodging tax that we'd like to implement within the Main Street Business Improvement District. The resolution did outline a per night, per room charge to be used at the Hilton Garden Inn and the Hilton Garden Inn only. In the short run, the revenue from this collection would be used for development costs at the site of the river ramp, which will be the future site of that hotel. In the long run, we do anticipate revenues going towards general bid activities in the downtown area. This ordinance formally codifies those actions, or that action taken in March on the resolution, and because of that extra step, I'm keeping this intentionally brief, but would be able to answer questions or provide additional information.
Brent, thank you. This is a first reading, folks, so you don't have the opportunity to engage, but the council does. Council, questions or comments?
Move for approval, Anderson.
Second, Erpenbach.
Councilor Anderson Jr. has made a motion to set a hearing and second reading for Monday, April 16th at 7 p.m. for this item. It was seconded by Councilor Erpenbach. If there is no further discussion, a roll call vote, please.
Councilors Intamin?
Yes.
Erpenbach?
Yes.
Jamison?
Yes.
Karski?
Yes.
Rolfing?
Yes.
Aguilar?
Yes.
Anderson?
Yes.
Brown?
Yes.
Thank you. That is passed 8-0. Item 9.
First reading an ordinance of the City of Sioux Falls, South Dakota, providing supplemental appropriations for CIP number 148014, right-of-way acquisition for Public Works, engineering $580,000.
Good evening, Chad Heavey with the Engineering Division of Public Works. This supplemental appropriation is associated with the Solberg Overpass over I-229 project, in southwest Sioux Falls. The project is a joint venture between the South Dakota Department of Transportation and the City of Sioux Falls. The Department of Transportation will fund the cost for the bridge, the overpass over I-229, and then the city will fund the roadways north of the bridge and then south of the bridge. The city's portion of the project is being funded with federal dollars we receive annually through the Surface Transportation Program. This spring, the city acquired the final right-of-way for this project with sales tax funds, and that cost was $580,000. The sales tax funds that we spent have been reimbursed by our funds from our Surface Transportation Program account, which is managed by the Department of Transportation. So tonight's ordinance will supplement engineering's capital project for right-of-way acquisition by $580,000. Bids will be open for this project by the Department of Transportation on April 18th, and construction will be completed in 2013.
Chad, thank you. Another first reading. So, Council, did you have any questions or motions of Chad?
Move
Councilor
for approval,
Jameson?
Anderson.
Oh, I'm sorry, Councilor Jameson.
Just a quick question, Chad. How will this bridge, when it's all done, impact the 57th and Louise intersection? Would it ease the pressure?
Absolutely. The goal of the project is to take traffic off that 57th and Louise Avenue intersection and get people using 69th Street that are, let's say, going to that business development in the same way with using 57th Street. And when that project is done, you would be able to get off, let's say, I-29 at the T exit. Now, some of that is gravel as you go north, but you would be able to take Tallgrass Avenue, which turns into Solberg Avenue, and take that all the way to 41st Street, or all the way to 49th Street. So I think it's going to be another route that people will also use to get to the Empire Mall and avoid sometimes the congested Louise Avenue.
Very good.
Councilor Jameson, thanks for bringing that up. Councilor Anderson, Jr.
Move for approval.
Second, Karski.
Councilor Anderson, Jr. has made a motion to set a date of hearing and second reading for Monday, April 16th at 7 p.m. for this item. It was seconded by Councilor Karski. Is there any other discussion, Council? Very good. A roll call vote, please.
Councilors Entenmann?
Yes.
Erkenbach?
Yes.
Jameson?
Yes.
Karski?
Yes.
Rolfing?
Yes.
Aguilar?
Yes.
Anderson?
Yes.
Brown?
Yes.
Thank you. That is passed 8-0. Item 10.
A first reading and ordinance of the City of Sioux Falls providing supplemental appropriation, Event Center Construction Fund, $4 million.
Mr. Breck.
Good evening, Mr. Mayor, members of the council. This is a supplemental appropriation ordinance that, if approved, it would allow the transfer of $4 million of unobligated money from the Capital Improvement Fund remaining from 2011 to the Event Center Construction Fund. This would, in effect, provide a cash down payment of sorts for the construction of the Event Center and would reduce the amount of debt needed for the project by more than $4 million. This, in effect, in other words, would use cash for a portion of the project rather than debt. And as a follow-up to my briefing earlier this afternoon, the debt to be avoided here would be taxable bonds. What this ordinance does not do is increase the amount of budget for the project. I know that question came up previously, and I wanted to make clear that approving this ordinance does not authorize any additional public funds to be spent for the project. The budget for the project would remain at $115 million. The effect of the ordinance is to reduce the amount of capital dollars needed to make bond payments in the future. So if we're borrowing less, it stands to reason that our principal and interest payments going forward over the life of the bonds would also be less. And in effect, that will free up capital dollars in the years to come for other projects. So if we're paying less in principal and interest over the years to come, we will have more dollars available for other projects, not fewer dollars, but more money for future street projects, park projects, and other types of projects that are funded using our capital improvement dollars. We've estimated that an average of $300,000 per year additional money would be available in our capital program if this ordinance is approved. That would be for the estimated 22-year term of the bonds. That would amount to over $6.5 million, including about $2.5 million of interest costs that would be saved by utilizing this cash. That means an average of $300,000 more available each year for 22 years for other capital projects for street and park improvements and other city building and equipment needs. I look at this ordinance as an opportunity to make a good financing plan for the Event Center project, an even better plan. The plan that was presented to the voters was the best plan that we could get, the best plan that we could develop. At the time, it wasn't a perfect plan. I think that was acknowledged on a number of occasions. Perfection, of course, is rarely achieved. And if we waited for the perfect plan to come along, we wouldn't move forward on many projects ever. But in spite of the fact that it was not a perfect plan, the voters did approve the project and authorize us to move ahead. In the weeks and months leading up to the election, the financing plan did receive a fair amount of criticism. It was criticized for the lack of a cash down payment. It was criticized by some in the public, and it was criticized by some on the City Council because the plan relied entirely on bond financing or borrowed money for the project. Even though the voters did approve it in November, the work didn't stop on Election Day on trying to improve on the financing plan. The financing team worked extremely hard to find ways to improve on the financing plan, to continue to improve and to find ways to reduce the cost of the financing to the taxpayers. And I think the briefing that you heard earlier today on the bond sale that took place last month is certainly evident of that. That bond sale was extremely successful and reduced our costs of borrowing for that portion of the project far below what was expected. And in fact, we've estimated the savings at more than $16 million in interest below what we had anticipated for interest costs. Now, this is an opportunity, I believe, that the City Council has to save the taxpayers millions more on this project. This is an opportunity to demonstrate to the public and the taxpayers that the city does not run like the federal government, that we don't borrow money that we don't have to borrow. Some, I think, have looked at this particular decision on how to use this $4 million as a choice between two options. Option number one being to spend the money on streets or parks or other projects we feel are important, or option two, to spend the money on the event center. And that's really, if that's the way you're looking at this decision or these choices, you really have missed the point. And I think there have been some folks that have missed the point. The real options are to spend the $4 million now on streets or parks or whatever priority projects we have, or to avoid $4 million in debt and save an estimated $2.5 million and have, in effect, $6.5 million over the years to come to spend on streets, parks, and other projects. I believe, as your finance director, I'm here to express my opinion that I believe the ordinance is the most prudent use of this $4 million, that it will indeed pay dividends for years to come by reducing interest costs each year, and will make more capital dollars available for the years ahead. And I would urge you to support this ordinance. Thank you.
Councilor Trebek, thank you again, folks. This is a first reading, so you don't have the opportunity. But Council, did you have any comments or questions on this particular at this particular time?
Move to approve Entenmann.
Second, Anderson.
Councilor Anderson Jr. has made a, I'm so sorry, Councilor Entenmann has made a motion to set a hearing and second reading for Monday, April 16th at 7 p.m. for item number 10. It was seconded by Councilor Anderson Jr. Is there any discussion tonight? Councilor Rolfing.
Would it be good to set this second reading back a little bit so that we have a little more chance to discuss this, not knowing where some of this money could be used? I like the idea of using it for the event center. I truly do. But I also know that there's some sentiment on the council for using it in other places that it might be good. And before we do this, I think there's some things that could come up, and I would like to have a little more chance to discuss this with the other council members. So I'm wondering if we could, if I could amend this to a date that is further out. Would anybody have any suggestions for me here? Oh, I guess I've got a calendar here too, don't I? We're looking at April 16th, and how about, because we haven't borrowed the money yet, so we're not losing anything on it. Let's say May 15th.
Councilor Rolfing has made an amendment to the main motion to set the hearing and second reading for May 15th. Is there a second? That motion dies for a lack of a second. Is there any further discussion on the main motion? Counselor I'm losing. Karski, thanks. Dean Karski.
Director Turbach, when do you expect the second bonds? When were you planning on doing the sale on those? Give us an idea of the timing.
The no sale has been scheduled. My desire would be to know going into the negotiations and the process for negotiating a deal on the naming rights, know what we have of this $4 million for the project. And so in other words, I think it would be beneficial to the process for the naming rights if a decision is made on this $4 million prior to that deal being negotiated. And that's, as you know, from this afternoon's briefing, that's coming up fairly quickly.
Thank you. I guess I agree with Councilor Rolfing that we probably do need a little more time, and I'd make a motion that we amend the main motion by going to May 1st.
Councilor Rolfing, Councilor Karski has made an amendment to the main motion to set the date of hearing and second reading for May 1st. May 1st.
I'll second that.
There has been a second by Councilor Entman. Is there any discussion on this amendment?
Yes.
Oh, okay, Councilor Rolfing.
I'm just looking at this, and we're looking at the second. We're going to go, that'll be a full month, and that should give us time to look at a working session and things like that. I would pass this on to our esteemed council chair so that I know she's planning on a working session between now and then. So we would have time to discuss it. Is that right?
Councilor Aguilar?
It hasn't been confirmed. I am looking for one for April 25th, but this was a discussion that was started in fiscal, and they will not meet again until May 1.
So, Councilor Karski, could you, if with fiscal, could you move that date back a little bit? That's what I was thinking.
Are we talking amend the amended motion to May 8th?
Well, maybe make a friendly amendment or a to your May 1st date, Councilor Karski.
One more time?
To May 8th.
May 8th works for me. So moved.
And now, Councilor Entman, would you be? Second. Okay. So there's been is this legal, Gail? Or should we vote on the amendment? What do you want?
Well, I think the May 1st date got a motion and a second.
Yes.
So I'm not a parliamentarian. I think you should vote just to be safe and then make it again.
Mr. Mayor, if, and I may be wrong, but if the person who made the motion and the seconder change it, then you can do that.
That's what I always thought, too. So with that in mind, there has been a change to make it instead of May 1st, May 8th. It was made by Councilor Karski. It was seconded by Councilor Entman. Is there any discussion on that? Very good. We're now voting on the amendment. So all those in favor, let's have a roll call vote, please. To May 8th.
Councilors Intiman,
Yes.
Erpenbach,
No.
Jameson,
No.
Karski,
Yes.
Rolfing,
Yes.
Aguilar,
No.
Anderson,
No.
Brown.
No.
That has failed. We have a main motion on the floor right now, and if there is no further discussion, we will vote on that main motion. A roll call vote, please.
Councilors Intiman,
Yes.
Erpenbach,
No.
Jameson,
No.
Karski,
No.
Rolfing,
Yes.
Aguilar,
No.
Anderson,
No.
Brown.
No.
That has failed 2-6. Council, any further discussion on this item? Very good. Item number
11.
11.
Deferred action from the meeting on March 12, 2012, a resolution abating and refunding front foot assessments for street maintenance fees at parcel number 53604.
Good evening, Chad Heavey. This property is at 1405 North Sycamore Avenue, which is, if you were on Sycamore Avenue by Washington High School and you just continued north, this property is on the end of that street on the left-hand side. In 2011, the property owner, Mr. Hanton, called us and had some questions about his front footage fee for street maintenance. We, in turn, reduced his frontage in that calculation from 580 feet down to 20 feet because only 20 feet of that right-of-way is maintained by the city. So tonight's resolution will refund Mr. Hanton $1,325 for incorrect charges from 2008, 2009, and 2010, and engineering supports the refund.
Chad, thank you.
Move to approve, Brown.
Second, Anderson.
Councilor Brown's made a motion to approve this item. It was seconded by Councilor Anderson, Jr. Is there any discussion on this? Very good. A roll call vote, please.
Councilors Intiman,
Yes.
Erpenbach,
Yes.
Jameson,
Yes.
Karski,
Yes.
Rolfing,
Yes.
Aguilar,
Yes.
Anderson,
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
Item 12, deferred action from the meeting of March 12, 2012, a resolution abating and refunding storm drainage fee assessments at parcel number 53604.
This resolution is also in regards to Mr. Hanton's property and involves the refund of storm drainage fees. Engineering does not support the refund, and Mr. Hanton wants to speak on his behalf. Unfortunately, his wife is ill. She had surgery today. He is not able to join us tonight, and so on his behalf, I am requesting a deferral of this item again to Tuesday, May 8th, so he can be present to address you, the council.
So moved, Erpenbach.
Second, Anderson.
Councilor Erpenbach's made a motion to defer this item to a later date. Seconded by Councilor
Karski.
Karski. Thank you. If there's no further discussion, a roll call vote, please.
Councilors Intiman,
Yes.
Erpenbach,
Yes.
Jameson,
Yes.
Karski,
Yes.
Rolfing,
Yes.
Aguilar,
Yes.
Anderson,
Yes.
Brown.
Yes.
That is passed 8-0. Item 13.
A resolution vacating the public right-of-way on North National Avenue from East 54th Street North to the south property line of Track 16, Ralph's Tracks, and East 52nd Street North from the west property line of Track 16, Ralph's Tracks, to North Jessica Avenue.
This right-of-way is in northeast Sioux Falls and is between 54th Street North and Benson Road and Cliff Avenue and Lewis Avenue. The right-of-way is unimproved, does not contain public utilities, but does contain a private natural gas line. If vacated, utility easements will not be maintained, except for a small utility easement for that existing gas line. The petitioner is Dave Van Tull with Vander Hags. If vacated, the land is proposed to be used in the expansion of Vander Hags' truck and equipment business. The property was recently rezoned from the light industrial district to the heavy industrial district. The petitioner has complied with our street vacation policy and is present tonight to answer any questions. National Avenue has been identified as a north-south collector street in this area, and portions of National Avenue have been constructed. Because of this, when the petition was received, we had a neighborhood meeting on February 8th and was attended by approximately 20 people. There is no opposition to the vacation of 52nd Street North, but there was opposition voiced regarding the vacation of National Avenue. And I'm going to tonight just attempt to paraphrase one of the things that I heard that night. I think there may be some in the audience tonight that will want to share their opinions. But the main concern I heard was that it's difficult for drivers when they're on National Avenue heading south to make the left turn on National to travel east on Benson Road at peak times. And then if National Avenue is vacated and not constructed, the chances of there ever being sufficient traffic at the intersection to warrant a traffic signal is very unlikely. During the neighborhood meeting, we committed to conducting a traffic signal warrant study at this intersection. We conducted that study, and warrants are not met for a signal at the intersection of Benson Road and National Avenue. If you look up on the screen now, when I mentioned that National Avenue is unimproved, here's a picture of National Avenue looking south. You have the other views too. Here's a picture of looking at the right-of-way. Right now you're north of Benson Road looking north, and I think there's one more view too. And then here is, you're standing at about National Avenue in the intersection of 50th Street North, looking at the current right-of-way. So, if you go back a couple slides, right there, okay. If National Avenue is vacated, as you look on your screen, National Avenue is in blue from 60th Street North down to Benson Road. If National is vacated, what you'll have then is the new collector street will be National Avenue from 60th Street North down to 54th Street North, and then what you see in orange will be the new collector route, which will be Jessica Avenue from 54th down to 50th Street North, and then there could be any number of combinations. You could have 50th Street constructed all the way over to Lewis. You could have 50th Street constructed back to National. Jessica could continue down to Benson. One thing I want to mention is that because of the signal space or the spacing between Jessica and Lewis, as far as traffic signal spacing goes, a signal will not be installed at Jessica and Benson Road. What we're recommending now, a safer alternative in the future, would be to access Benson Road from National Avenue, is to use 50th Street North to get over to Lewis, make the right-hand turn, get onto Lewis, and then get to the signal at Benson Road to proceed to the east. The petitioner has signed a petition for public improvements for their land that abuts Jessica Avenue. The petitioner has also had discussions with the property owner on the east side of Jessica Avenue. They did not sign the petition, but it's my understanding they are not opposed to the construction of Jessica Avenue in the future. We also have a petition for public improvements signed by one of the properties on 50th Street North, just east of National Avenue. I want to remind the council that when you have streets like this that have several different property owners, typically they are constructed by the city, and then they are assessed to the property owners once the project is completed. So at some point in the future, when development and or traffic volumes require these roadways to be improved, we will work like we have done with other property owners up here to construct and improve the roads as the demand is there in the future. Engineering and planning have reviewed the alternate road system proposed for this area and feel it is acceptable. Therefore, we recommend approval tonight.
Chad, thank you. And there is someone in the audience who wanted to speak to this tonight?
I believe there is.
Very good. Please come forward, sir, and if you just state your name, we'd appreciate that.
Gary Schmidt with Allied Oil and Tire.
Welcome, Gary.
We're at 3813 National Avenue. My company has a tire facility at that 3813 address with the intention in the future of moving our warehouse from a Brandon address to our property. At 3813, we've got 3 acres of bare land. Our concern would be this would be about a 60,000 square foot facility and then parking lot to handle our 24 employees, company vehicles, employee vehicles, customer vehicles, and vendor deliveries. Our new facility, when we get to it, would close off kind of an alternate route right now that kind of cuts through our property, goes into House Oil. There's actually quite a bit of traffic that cuts through there from that industrial area. If we build a facility, that would be gone, so that would leave us one way out of our facility, and that's that short paved portion of National Avenue. So then we would have that additional traffic to get out of National Avenue onto Benson with no other paved option out of that area. Now, I heard mention of 50th Street potentially being improved. I guess if that was a viable option, then our opposition to closing National Avenue might not be. We might consider not opposing if that truly is an option. Right now, it's a gravel road with a fairly steep incline, not really suited for tractor-trailer traffic. Then our other concern would be the whole industrial area, and that in this whole area is kind of a hodgepodge of roads and paved, then gravel, then a dead end. You know, it's really kind of a mixture of roads, and National Avenue going through there would certainly be, I think, advantageous to that whole industrial area as far as moving traffic, additional building property, you know, development in that area. We're also a tire service facility, so with potential higher traffic counts being very important to our future growth, we would have concern spending, you know, approximately $2 million on a facility with future growth of traffic count on the Benson and Cliff area and potential issues of getting in and out of that property as traffic continues to grow in that area. Sum it up, Allied would be opposed to vacating National Avenue without other potential paved road options in that area.
Gary, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes. Councilor Rolfe?
Gary?
Gary, would you mind staying up here, please?
Can
Thank
you
Councilor Rolfe?
ask him, can I ask you exactly where your property is? If they could point that out?
Chad will show us here.
They're gonna. Okay, now you got me mixed up.
So you can see kind of a long driveway into our facility.
Okay.
And that's kind of the road that cuts through to Howell's Gas Stop, Marlin's Grill. So what we would do is attach our facility onto that, which would definitely close that road off. And the facility would go towards National Avenue.
So your facility would face east?
Correct. It'd go to the east, yeah, towards
Go
National
to the
Avenue.
east, toward National.
From that building there towards National Avenue. So in effect, we would have one way out of there unless you wanted to go up those gravel roads that are, you know, steep incline and not overly well maintained.
So you really need to get out to the east and then come straight south on National Avenue.
Correct. Now, again, if there was another paved option out of there, but I also do believe National Avenue going all the way through would certainly, I think it would help that industrial area overall, the flow of traffic and potential future growth and the like.
Can you go back to the one that you had up there before, now that we've got an idea of where he is? There, oh, there. Okay, so we're right about where the dot is there.
Yeah, I can't quite tell from that little.
Yeah, you're about where the red dot is right there now.
That's correct. Oh, there we go, yeah.
Oh, yeah, that's right, that's right. Yeah, you're over there.
Councilor Jameson?
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Chad, the vacation policy.
Gary, thank you.
Does Gary's property abut the, help me understand this.
No, it does not.
Okay.
In the city of Sioux Falls, it's required that every property owner that abuts the right-of-way sign the petition for it to be a valid petition.
Yeah.
In that case, they have. I will make just a comment on National Avenue going north. Typically, when I mentioned the assessment project, I would envision that when you have more than two property owners that abut a street, two property owners could potentially work together to build it. However, building one block of a street is very inefficient. It's very expensive. You don't have, you need a longer street to realize the efficiencies of having large quantities of curb and gutter and so on and so forth. And so what we would always envision is coming out here and building a half mile of street or a quarter mile of street, the city doing the project and then assessing them. But one of the things with those assessment projects is we would never bring it forward without support of at least 50% of the abutting property owners. In this case, none of those abutting properties are, at this point, support the construction of that road. And so I don't know if I would bring that to the council without having at least some support for the construction of that roadway.
Mr. Mayor.
Councilor Jameson, thank you. Councilor Brown?
Go ahead, Kenny.
Councilor Brown?
No, go ahead, Councilor Brown, I'll wait.
But can you foresee, I mean, sometimes we have to look at the greater good for an entire area. And if there is growth in that area and other businesses that would benefit, we might consider that, right?
I think, yes, I agree, and that's why we've looked at, is there another viable route to get people to a different collector, and that's why we've shown you Jessica and 50th Street North.
Councilor Anderson, Jr.
Thank you. Councilman Brown, to also elaborate on that, I have driven up in that area for about the last 2 months, taking a very hard look at this. Also, if you go a couple pictures further where you were showing some of the other businesses, or actually showing right there, where you see the semi-trailers right now, that is where National Avenue would go through, is right alongside that fence. Collectively putting the business that you see there, they would have to move. So in our discussions during one of the public meetings that we had is when we started talking about paving 50th Street North instead of National Avenue through there, through that area. And if we did 50th Street North, it will allow this business to continue in the space they're at, because otherwise they can't bring their semis out. By paving 50th Street North to Jessica and then Jessica up to 54th Street North, that does allow the businesses on National Avenue between Benson and 50th Street North to be able to have a different access out that I feel is a lot safer than them driving out from National Avenue onto Benson Road. And once again, as Chad spoke earlier, one of the first things I asked Chad to do was to do a traffic count on National Avenue and Benson Road, just to see if we were going to be able to put a light there. And National Avenue does not run south of Benson Road either. So there is not going to be a lot of traffic in that intersection for a traffic light. So that was just the ideal that we came up with, so that we would allow those businesses on that one block of National Avenue that is already developed to be able to have a safe route out.
Chad or Heath, did you want to, is there anything? Sounds good.
I'll move for approval.
There's been a motion to approve by Councilor Anderson Jr.
Second, Karski.
It's been a second by Councilor Karski.
Mr.
Councilor
Mayor,
Rolfing.
I think there's another gentleman who had something to say here.
The owner.
Very good. Come on forward, sir. Thank you.
Hello, Dave Van Tol from Vanderhiggs Incorporated. Thank you.
Bet.
Just Vanderhiggs Incorporated has a salvage yard. We've been in business here in Sioux Falls for roughly 20 years. We're looking to expand our business. We're currently operating on roughly 11 acres of property. We recently got this 15 acres rezoned for heavy industrial. Having National Avenue run through the middle of our business, the two properties would be a very great hindrance on our property and on our expansion plans. Chad has worked very, very well with us and with some of the other people up in that area. He's shown many different options on the traffic getting in and out of that area. The 50th Street running over to Lewis and Jessica is definitely a viable, good option for anybody up in that area. This property has literally, this area needs some expansion. We need some bit more businesses up there. We need more employees up there. Right now we're roughly in the 25 employee range. We feel with this expansion, without a road running through the middle of our two businesses, or our business, our potential for new employees is double that. We can have 50 new employees within the next 5 to 10 years. So expansion will be very good for us. So I ask for your approval on the vacating of National and 52nd Street.
Thank you much, and please, my apologies for not having you have the opportunity to speak. I'm so sorry. Councilor Rolfing, thank you. Good job. Is there anyone else who wanted to speak to this item? All right, very good. There is a motion, and it has been seconded. If there is no further discussion, a roll call vote, please.
Councilors Entman?
Yes.
Erpenbach?
Yes.
Jamison?
Yes.
Karski?
Yes.
Rolfing?
Yes.
Aguilar?
Yes.
Anderson?
Yes.
Brown?
No.
That is passed 7-1. Item number 14.
No.
A resolution advising and giving consent to the appointment of members to certain citizen boards.
James, would you mind reading those to the council and to the public, please?
Yes, Mr. Mayor.
Thank you.
Diane D. Coyer, Planning Commission. Tim Fonder, Board of Appeals. John Overby, Solid Waste Planning Board. Deborah Reinecke, Solid Waste Planning Board.
Move to approve Entman.
Councilor Hammond, thank you.
Second, Erpenbach.
There is a motion, and it has been seconded. Is there any discussion on this item? Very good. A roll call vote, please.
Councilors Entman?
Yes.
Erpenbach?
Yes.
Jamison?
Yes.
Karski?
Yes.
Rolfing?
Yes.
Aguilar?
Yes.
Anderson?
Yes.
Brown?
Yes.
Thank you. That is passed 8-0. Council, any further items to discuss
Move to
tonight?
adjourn, Erpenbach.
Second.
Councilor Boss made a motion to adjourn. It has been seconded by Councilor Jamison. All will now have a roll call vote, please.
Councilors Entman?
Yes.
Erpenbach?
Yes.
Jamison?
Yes.
Karski?
Yes.
Rolfing?
Yes.
Aguilar?
Yes.
Anderson?
Yes.
Brown?
Yes.
Thank you. That is passed 8-0. Sioux Falls, thank you so much. City Council, great job tonight. You earned your pay. Make it a great night. This meeting is adjourned.